All right. Well, welcome everybody to week 2 of Master Your Mind, a mental health moment. So just want to give a quick shout out to the first week. If you missed the first week, I would encourage you to just go back and watch that. I was able to talk with Pastor Kevin and Jolene just about the role that stress plays in our mental health, the way that, stress affects our spiritual lives. And we just had such a great conversation about healthy habits we can be practicing to safeguard our mental health during this time. So I'd encourage you to go back and watch that if you missed that. But this week, I am so excited to announce that I have my good friend, mentor, boss with me today, Amy Dover. So when I lived in Alabama, I had the pleasure of working for Amy at her practice at Dover Counseling. And it was such a great experience. She's such a wonderful boss and mentor and friend, and just honestly one of my favorite people. So I'm excited that she is here with us today. And she is also a licensed marriage and family therapist, and so has lots of experience just working with people, talking about emotions, their mental health, and just helping them. So Amy, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me. This is
Awesome.
exciting.
Yes, this is exciting. How do you feel like you have been doing during this kind of bizarre time of quarantine?
Well, if I have to be honest, there have been some days where I've had to dig pretty deeply for my good coping skills.
Yes, right. I'm with you there.
Yes, it's there are days that have been very challenging because my work has shifted to all online over the last month for the month of April, and that has been a challenge in and of itself. But then seeing the schedules of my children and my husband change, and the family adjusting to those changes has some days have been great. Some days we haven't quite gotten it right, but that's okay.
Right. Yep. I feel like that is so true to everyone's experience that I'm hearing is that it's kind of a roller coaster in quarantine when it comes to emotions. And it's like sometimes we feel like we got a handle on it and we're doing okay.
Hmm.
And then sometimes we're just really not. And
Absolutely.
so, it just kind of goes back and forth. I know it's been absolutely the same for me. So I'm excited that today we are talking about how we can help people kind of manage that a little bit better during this time. And so, the first week we got to focus a little bit on, being aware of our stress, how to practice some healthy habits. But this week we're going to dive in a little bit more into talking about specifically emotions and how do we process emotions well? How do we um, kind of cope with the different emotions that are coming during this time, and how do we practice healthy coping skills versus unhealthy coping skills? How do we know the difference between the two? So that is kind of what we're focused on today. And I know that as we were preparing for this, we were kind of laughing that we're having to take a lot of our own advice as therapists during this time.
Yes. Have had to practice what I preach.
Right? Absolutely. I know the same thing. I'm like, okay, what do I tell my clients? How am I implementing this in my own life? It's definitely a
Yes.
time you just have to be super intentional about being aware of your emotions and processing through them well and coping well, because it's not something that just happens during this season.
Yes. I think that's a key word there, being intentional.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just kind of go through the motions and allow ourselves to kind of fall into bad habits. But, if we are intentional about how am I, how am I feeling about what's happening right now? How am I feeling about the changes that are happening to me and to my family? And how am I feeling about just kind of the political climate and the fear that's out there, and how this is affecting me? And if we're not intentional about that, it's very easy for the fear and the worry and the anxiety and the uncertainty to kind of take over.
Yeah.
So we very much have to be on guard about that. And we are when we are being intentional about it.
Yeah. Yep. That's really good. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like one of the things that is making processing our emotions during this time difficult is there are so many different elements at play. You just mentioned several of them, and I think that's what's so hard. And it's a hard time for everyone, but yet it's impacting everyone slightly differently. And how we're
Mhm.
managing all of this. And I feel like how one person can feel and cope with things can be vastly different than someone else, even people living in the same house. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So It's just very different. So that's why I think especially it's important to be intentional about how you are feeling, and to be really processing through that, and so that we stay healthy and we stay on top of the things, that we're feeling, and be okay with what we individually are feeling versus how someone else might be dealing with that.
Absolutely. There's this really great meme. I love memes.
Me too.
There's this really great meme that's out right now, kind of circulating in our part of the area in Alabama. It came from one of the local county emergency management operations around here. And it's basically saying, some people are ready to leave their home. Be kind to them. Some people want to remain at home. Be kind to them. Some people do not have the fear that you do about this. Be kind to them. It's very much identifying, hey, we're all kind of in different places with this. And, you may be struggling, but maybe I'm not struggling so much, but they are over there. And right. it is happening in the same home. Different people are struggling in different ways or thriving in different ways.
Right.
So, I really liked how that said it, just kind of meet people where they are, which, Jesus did that.
Yes, absolutely.
But meet people where they are and recognize that, we all are coming from different places and struggling in different ways, or maybe doing okay, and not judging that, not having a hard time with that, just kind of taking it as it is and acknowledging it and being kind.
Right. Yes, I absolutely love that. And I think that's even of heightened importance as we're talking about kind of going back out into society. I feel like some of that has, that conversation has just been brought out even more. Some people are excited, feel like we're ready, some people are not. And there's even so much that goes into that. But I love that. Just be kind. Everyone is processing through their own feelings about it. And they all have their own reasons and beliefs and thoughts for feeling the way that they do. And so the best thing that we can do is just support each other and be kind during this time. So I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. So to kind of kick us off and talking about how to really process emotions, let's talk about that. What does it mean so this is something I think that we say as counselors a lot of times. It's like, well, you need to process that. It's kind of like one of our trademark words, right along with how do you feel about that? Right. So what does that mean from a counselor's perspective to really process an emotion?
It's funny that we're talking about this, because when you reached out to me and asked me to do this with you, and you said, I want to talk about emotional processing, I had to stand back and say, what does that mean? If I'm actually going to tell someone, like, how do I explain that?
Right. I did the same thing.
Yes, because you're right. It's something that we just kind of do naturally, and it's part of the job and kind of part of our lives at this point after doing this for a little while. But
right.
Emotional processing is really just kind of stepping back and looking at how you're feeling about things, and being able to say, I felt this way when that happened, or I'm feeling this way and I'm not even sure why. Let me kind of look and see at maybe some things that have taken place, or things that have not taken place that I expected to take place, right, that haven't, and kind of, how am I feeling? Just where am I with some of these things that are happening in my life, or that have not happened, and really acknowledging that the emotions and the feelings are there, and looking at them, and then starting to process that. The thinking process, talking about it with someone that's trusted, but I always say that the first step in that process is, let me just acknowledge that I'm even having these emotions.
Right. Yep. I love that. I am like, one of my favorite things to do too in therapy is kind of use analogies with people, and they probably aren't always amazing, but it's just how my brain works. But I remember, telling a client once that processing an emotion is almost like if you had a marble and you held a marble out in front of you, and you were like looking at it, and you were looking at all the different like shapes and colors and how they're morphing into one another. And then you're kind of just like shifting that marble and doing that all the way around that marble. That's kind of like processing an emotion. It's like kind of like holding it out in front of you, looking at everything that it's connected to. And, you might have it kind of figure it out in one light, but then as you shift that a little bit, it can change, and you have to continue processing that as you kind of turn that around. And so
that's actually a great analogy. I'm totally going to steal that.
Okay, you have my permission. But yeah, so I love that. So it's really just, I think another term that's a little trendy right now is holding space, and so I think about even what that means is like, just giving yourself space to really feel what you feel in a moment, and to be okay with that, to almost kind of like let a feeling run its course a little bit, so that you're sitting in that going, okay, why am I feeling this way? What is that connected to? Is this a pattern that I feel too? Does this always come up in these, kinds of situations? And then if it does, what do I do about that? And so I think that is, just holding space for your emotions, and giving yourself the ability to really process that. I feel like we keep coming back to that word, but yeah, it is. It's just like really working through that feeling.
Yes. I mean, there's a reason why we like the word process. It's because, I mean, most things that we, that we have to do in life, there's a process to it. You didn't become a counselor overnight. There was a process to you doing that, just like there was for me. And, I like to say that forgiveness is a process. Depending on the offense, I can't just snap my fingers and say, it's forgiven. I have to kind of work through the steps of that forgiveness. And, living is just kind of a process. And so emotions are the same way, and working through those and kind of figuring out, this is how I feel, and, holding it to the light, like your beautiful analogy, and, me shift it this way and kind of think about my, how I'm feeling in this light, and see if it changes. And, so it, process is one of those words, like, how do you define that? But when you look at it in the context of just kind of life in general, it makes sense. And we have to do that with our emotions too.
Yep. I love that. Awesome. So then follow-up question to that, what happens when we don't fully process our emotions? Maybe we make a habit of constantly pushing our feelings to the side, suppressing them, when we're not actively processing emotions as they come. What happens long-term?
Good question. And this is where one of my analogies come into play.
Awesome.
And it's an old analogy, but I think it speaks just well to not processing emotions. It's like a volcano. So, volcanoes, they erupt when the pressure has built and built and built underneath the surface to the point where it's got to go. The pressure has built to the point where the volcano is going to erupt. And people like to think that just because they're not thinking about their emotions, or just because they're avoiding them, that they're going away,
right?
When they're really not. We're just kind of setting them over here to the side, but there's still energy with those emotions. There's still things that we have to look at. We're just choosing not to look at it at the time. Right. And they're building. The pressure is building, just like that volcano. And typically, if a person has a difficult time kind of identifying or talking about how they're feeling about something, and they just stuff them, that's what I call it, stuffing their emotions, that volcano is going to erupt. And sometimes it's something very small that sets off the eruption. And when those emotions erupt, a lot of times it's like a real volcano. It's destructive. It destroys things. It's ugly. Lives are impacted. And so we want to keep that from happening. We don't want to be volcanic with our emotions. We want to be the type of people who, this is how I'm feeling, and I'm not really quite sure. I'm going to process through that. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't exist. And then I'm going to figure out what I need to do after I figure out how I feel. So if we're not taking a look at how we're feeling about things, and if we're not verbalizing that, processing through that, and figuring out what to do with it, we're really putting ourselves at a disadvantage, and possibly the people that we share life with. Right.
Yep. And I love that you said that about, just because we are ignoring our emotion in the moment doesn't mean that they go away, but I think that's what we think a lot of times, because they do in the moment, right? We can push it away and, oh, it's gone, like no, I'm not going to feel that right now. I'm not going to think about that right now. Oh, and it's gone. So that worked. But what it does is it just pushes it all below the surface. And I remember, something I just tell clients all the time is emotions have to be processed. There is something about them where they have to be felt, they have to be experienced. So either you can make the choice to do that slowly as they come over time, or they build up and erupt, like your analogy of the volcano. And so whether you make that choice or it happens to you, they come out one way or the other.
Yes.
Right?
And we get to choose how we want them to come out. That's the beauty of, we certainly have control over how we want them to come out, but you're right. They are going to come out, and it can either be, under a controlled kind of healthy processing way, or it can be under the pressure, avoidance, I'm going to erupt way. And which one is better?
Right. Yes, absolutely. Example, one of my analogies that I always use about processing emotions too was emotions are like sandwiches. And so when you make a sandwich and you don't eat them right away, and say for some reason you covered it up in your room and you're getting dressed and you're throwing clothes everywhere, and you cover it up and you forget that sandwich is there because you're running a million miles an hour, for a couple of days, that is not going to make a big difference, right? You're probably not going to smell it, or it's not going to, it's going to be okay. Then all of a sudden you're going to, start smelling something that's off, right? And it's okay, where is that coming from? And you're going to be sniffing the clothes in your room, or, in the bathroom, or trying to figure out where that smell is coming from. And then after several more days, it's going to just permeate everything in the room, right? You're not going to be able to get away from the smell. It's going to be overwhelming, and you're going to go crazy until you find that sandwich and you toss it out of your room, right?
Yes. That's a great analogy.
Right? So I've always loved using that because at first that's totally how it is. At first, it's not going to make, be a big problem, but over time, you're not going to be able to get away from that. And until you go back and process that thing, and remove that, then that is it's just not going to get better until then.
It's not. And that's to kind of piggyback on that. It's one of those things too, where, if we're in the habit of suppressing or kind of stuffing our emotions, especially about things that have been a problem for us long term, like maybe the way someone treats us, or something that happens at work that just really bugs us. If we're not processing those emotions, if we're not really allowing ourselves to feel and then to work through that, it really just turns to bitterness and resentment, and that robs our joy. Those feelings, I tell people all the time, those are the emotions that will eat you from the inside out. I mean, they're like acid for us, and we'll just eat away at our souls and at our joy, and we're just not meant to live that way. And so if it takes me looking at my emotions and being honest with myself about how I feel and processing through those things to keep from being eaten from the inside out like that, then I'm going to do that. Jesus came to give us life and life abundantly. And if that means I have to process yucky emotions to have that abundant life, then that's what I have to do.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And I think one of the things that expressing that over time, like you mentioned, even if it's a pattern of things, how we're treated or something we think or feel, I think the hard thing about that becomes harder and harder to actually process those emotions because we don't necessarily know where they're coming from, right? So you find yourself in a situation where you're anxious and that anxiety is coming up, but you don't really know why you're anxious, and I can't tell, how many times I've talked to clients about that. They're like, all of a sudden I just, they're near a panic attack and they have no idea why, and so I think a lot of times it comes from suppressing those things over time, which makes it all build up and makes it harder to pinpoint exactly where that sandwich is because you don't remember making it and you don't remember it covered up.
And you feel ambushed almost, I think, by the emotions, and especially in a case like panic, you feel ambushed by it when really, no, those things have been there the whole time. You just haven't chosen to look at them and work through them. So,
Yes, absolutely. What do you think makes it hard for us to process our emotions as they come? Why do you think we have a tendency to suppress them and push them away as they come?
sometimes I think part of it is that they're just painful. You know, if there's a lot of pain, you know, with maybe the way that we've been treated, or maybe the way that we have acted, that's caused some emotions. You know, sometimes they're just very painful to look at. Sometimes there's a lot of shame, and guilt and fear. You know, it's hard to take a look at things that we know are going to cause us that, and to really take a good look and say, you know, where, you know, again, why am I feeling this way? Maybe how am I accountable? How am I culpable for those feelings? Did I create some of that for myself? Did I possibly, you know, create that for someone else? And, you know, it's really hard to do that. And then to kind of know where to go with it. And so sometimes it's just easier to pretend that they're not there. But as we said, they're always there, you know, until we process them and figure out kind of what box we need to put them in and put it up on the shelf. They're going to be there waiting for us to look at them. And the sooner that we can do that, the healthier we're going to be, and just the better life is going to be, the better relationships we're going to have, and you know, just the better quality of life that we're going to have. I think it takes us into a deeper relationship with God, because we're being honest with ourselves, and He knows the deal. You know, He knows where the emotions are coming from. Sometimes I think too that it's hard to look at it because, you know, we're afraid that, especially if a lot of times processing includes talking, and talking about it to a trusted friend or colleague or mentor, supervisor, pastor, whoever it might be. And there's always that feeling of being judged. There's always that feeling of they're going to look at me differently. So I'm just going to pretend that these feelings over here don't exist, so that I don't have to face the processing or the work of processing, and then maybe having to talk to someone about it too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's almost like making the choice between small difficulties over time versus one huge, massive difficulty in the future.
Absolutely. You know? Yes.
That difference. So, and I'm glad you kind of brought up, that was my next question too, about, okay, I think we've done a good job explaining what it really means to process an emotion correctly and fully, but practically how we do that. So like you said, just talking to someone. Obviously, that's why Amy and I believe a lot in therapy. That's why we decided that, you know, as our careers, because that is processing in and of itself, you know, just talking to someone about how you feel, really just voicing it, external processing. I feel like there's so much that can come just from just talking it through. A lot of times, you know, as we're talking about things, we come to conclusions on our own, or we find the solution on our own, just being willing to, you know, talk about it and talk through it. So I think that's a really awesome way, like you said, talking to someone just that you trust, that you feel like isn't going to judge you, is going to, like we mentioned earlier, hold space for what you're feeling, and be okay with that. Going to therapy, especially if you are noticing that there's some big themes and patterns with some of the emotions that you're feeling, but yet you are having a hard time working through them and overcoming them. Maybe you've tried other things and, you know, it's just not working, and you just need a professional voice in your life to help you process those emotions. You know, I think that's a great option. I'm always a big fan of journaling. That is something I recommend to everybody, because there's also something about, you know, just your thoughts and your emotions bouncing around in your mind is different than putting them on paper. There's something magical that happens there as well, as you're just pulling those thoughts from your mind and putting them on paper and going, wow, like I didn't even realize I really felt that way, or that thing connected to that thing. And I feel like writing it all down is such a powerful way to really process an emotion. And especially as a Christian, this is a great option for us as well, like a prayer journal. You know, like Amy said, God knows the things that we think and feel already. So first of all, why are we trying to hide them from him and not talk to him about it? And that's one of just my favorite things to do to process emotions, I feel, is I keep a prayer journal, and I just write out all the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And I just kind of spill it to God in that way. And I find that as I'm doing that, usually by the end of it, you know, I feel so much better. I can see truth again. I feel like it just, you know, my judgment isn't as clouded. and I'm inviting God into that process of how I'm processing my emotions. And I think that we really see this modeled in the Bible as well. I think just thinking about King David, he was known as the man after God's own heart, right?
Yes.
And he's the most emotional person in the Bible.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you read the Psalms and he's like, my bones are crushing inside of me, and, like all that stuff. And that's what he did. He wrote songs, and he talked to God about every single thing, that he was feeling. And so I think that has always been such an encouragement to me as well, that the emotions we feel aren't bad and they aren't dishonoring to God. But it's really important how we process those things and inviting God into that process. And so I think, journaling, prayer journaling is such a great way to do that. And Amy, I don't know if you have anything to add as far as like practical ways, or any thoughts about that.
I love how you brought up, journaling and of course talking and things like that. And you made the comment, you used the phrase inviting God into that process. And as Christians, I think that is so important for us, because he's our Father. He's our Creator, our Father. He so much wants to know the details of our lives and our thoughts and our feelings, and he so wants to be a part of that. Like nothing we feel or nothing we think is too mundane or worthless to him. He wants to know it all, and that only takes us into deeper fellowship and relationship with him. So I keep a prayer journal myself, and it's almost kind of like this huge conglomeration of a journal that I have. I keep answered prayers in it. I kind of date the day that and document when God has answered a specific prayer of mine, and then I put prayers in there, and but then I also kind of write out what's been happening in my life during the days. And so it's kind of like this huge thing, but there's such power in doing that. You use that word, and there is such power in that. There's power in talking, there's power in writing, there's power in getting things out of our head and getting it onto paper. And that's a huge part of processing. But inviting God into that, because God knows what it's like to lose a son. God knows what it's like to grieve. God knows what it's like to love. God knows disappointment. He knows pain and anguish. Jesus experienced all of those things when he was here on earth. And, I like to tell my clients, that Jesus was our greatest teacher in so many things. He taught us how to have boundaries with people. He teaches us how to manage emotions, and he has felt those things. So inviting him into your process, your emotional process is very important, because, he's been there. Yeah. There's nothing that you have felt that he hasn't felt. None of that. So, it builds such beautiful intimacy in your relationship with God, to invite him in and allow him to be a part of it. And I think that there's such comfort and peace that comes to when we invite him in. It's not going to get better overnight. We're not going to process overnight. Right. There's a reason why it's called a process, right. But it tends to be just a little bit better when he's walking along beside us, when we invite him to do that. Because someone said a few years ago that God is a gentleman. He's not just going to come in and start doing things for us unless we invite him, and unless we allow him to do that. And this is part of that. Invite him in and bring him alongside you, and let him hold you and walk with you as you go through the processing of those difficult emotions. And you'll come out the other side of it with a deeper relationship, more intimacy with him, and I think just more grace. Yeah, because you will have experienced it through the processing.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And I love that you touched on all that, because yes, Jesus was such a great teacher in all of those things. And really, like, he never judged anyone for where they were at in life and what they were feeling. He just met them where they were at and spoke truth to them, but through grace. And, he's such a great teacher in that. And, it made me think too that sometimes I think we forget as Christians that God created us as emotional beings. Yes. I think sometimes we almost treat our emotions like something that we're stuck with, or that something we just have to control, or we have to keep you know, tightly bound because emotions are bad. Or, you know, I think that Christians don't always do great at processing emotions because of this, because I think there is this belief that if we allow ourselves to have a negative emotion, right? Because we even like to put those in boxes of like, well, this is a bad emotion, this is a negative emotion, this is a shameful emotion. And so as a Christian, I shouldn't be struggling with that. And I just need to say a prayer and Jesus will take it away.
Yes.
And then I'll be good, you know? And so
Yes.
honestly, a lot of times my Christian clients are my hardest clients because we almost have to break through that barrier of it's okay to experience all sorts of emotions. That doesn't make you a bad Christian. It doesn't mean that you are not, you know, living how you should be. You know, emotions aren't bad. They aren't things that we need to just control. We do need to not be led by them. You know, I think it's important that we have things in the proper order. You know, I think that in our lives with Christ, we should be led by the Holy Spirit, and that, you know, the Spirit should be guiding our mind, which should be guiding our emotions. And it's important to, you know, keep things in that order. But processing through an emotion and allowing ourselves to feel that emotion fully, just like we were describing, is not dishonoring to God, because he created us with those emotions. And so I think sometimes, you know, as Christians, when we do that, we actually do what we were describing earlier. It's a form of, you know, suppressing our emotions and pushing them down, where it actually kind of keeps us captive to our emotions because we're not processing them. We're building that volcano, and then it comes out. And then sometimes that is exactly where shame comes from, you know, because we've had this inkling of, you know, these bad feelings and these bad emotions that we shouldn't be feeling over time. And all of a sudden it explodes out of us and we go, see, like I'm a bad person, or this inside of me was bad. And I think the enemy uses that to get in our minds as well and say, you know, see, like, you know, you're not doing what you're supposed to. You're not, you know, how could a child of God be feeling that, or, you know, be thinking that? And so what's your experience with that, Amy, and people of faith struggling with processing through their emotions?
I think you hit the nail on the head. They can sometimes be some of the most difficult to work with, because they do kind of come in with this mindset that it's not, God would not be okay if with me feeling anger, or, you know, God is going to be upset that I might feel a little depressed right now, or you know, I'm it says in the Bible that I just need to pray and it'll go away. And so breaking through some of those.
What passage is that again?
I know, like, can you quote what book from the Bible that's from? Because I think I missed that passage.
Right.
But, you know, just like you said, kind of breaking through that distorted thinking, and myths maybe that are kind of perpetuated throughout, you know, Christianity, because you're right. We are created in God's image, and we are emotional beings. We are spiritual beings, and I mean, having emotions is one of the most beautiful things about being human.
Right.
And so, God was very aware of what He was doing when He created us, and He knew emotions would be part of the mix. And it honestly kind of drives me crazy when people tell me that, oh, well, God's going to take it away from me. I don't need your help. I don't need anyone's help. God's going to take it away from me. And I just want to like shake those people,
shake
because
them a little bit, yeah.
Yes, because God is, I mean, He's our provider, our ultimate provider. And so He provides resources in our lives and people in our lives who can come alongside us, like we talked about earlier, and walk with us and help us hold those difficult emotions while we process through them. And, people maybe who have gone through the same things that we did, he puts in our lives at certain seasons so that we can lean on them and learn from them and have that real empathy that we need. And so when people say, oh, I'm just going to pray and God's going to take it away from me, I don't need to do this, and I don't need to talk about it, and I don't need you, and I don't need my friend or my pastor or whoever.
Right.
That to me is dishonoring God, because we are purposely choosing to ignore all of the wonderful resources and provisions that he has given us to look at those emotions or those difficulties and process through them in the right way. And that's sad to me, because that's a huge part of God's character, and that we're not allowing him to use for us. And, but you're right, kind of breaking through those mindsets for people can be very difficult. Or I hear a lot too, well, I don't need to talk about my emotions with a stranger. I hear that a lot. And I'm like, but that stranger might be placed in your life at such a time as this,
Right.
So,
exactly.
A part of the process too of I think with emotions is, allowing the process to work. I say that a lot too, to allow the process to do its job, allow it, give it time, allow it to do its thing. And part of that is recognizing, okay, this isn't something that I would normally do, but I'm going to maybe talk to this person about it, or I'm going to reach out to this person about it and see if it's helpful for me.
Right.
And again, I always come down to, how I always want to honor God with everything, emotions, thoughts, gifts, talents, whatever it might be. And how can I do that in a way, that I'm honoring his character and honoring him as my father. And that might be me reaching out to someone. That might be me talking to a stranger. That might be me acknowledging that I did this or I did that kind of brought these emotions on myself, and I have to take responsibility for that. So yeah, Christians as a whole, not all Christians, I'm talking about as a whole, we do sometimes, want to kind of hide behind the idea, the distorted thinking that, I don't need to process my emotions because God's going to take them away, or because I'm not supposed to feel this way. And that's just a disservice to ourselves. And you've heard the whole friendly fire thing too. Christians like to do friendly fire, which sometimes I think is true, and it's unfortunate. But, making sure that you're praying for God to put those people in your life who can come along with you and as you process through difficulties. And he's going to answer those prayers. He is going to be faithful. And asking, open my eyes so that I see the resources that you have around me. And then the beauty of it too is when we allow God to work in our processing like that, he's going to use it for good. He's going to take the difficult emotions that we've struggled with and that we've had to process through. If we allow it, he's only going to let it further his glory and his kingdom. And so we're going to get to come alongside someone in the future, who's maybe going through the same thing that we did, and we're going to be able to mentor. We're going to be able to hold them and walk with them, and that is such a privilege. And again, when we're kind of hiding behind the thought of, well, I'm not supposed to feel these things, or God is not allowing, God would not be happy if I did this, or I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to be depressed, or I'm just going to pray and let God take it away, we're really not allowing him to do some of his most amazing work.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I love that. And I've always felt that way. And counseling has been such an amazing thing that God has used in even my own personal life to help me overcome things. And Sam and I, my husband, went to marriage counseling when we first got married, and it was just revolutionary for us. And we went to an amazing just spirit-filled counselor who just smacked us around in a good way. And it was we look back at that time in our life, and we're so thankful for that. Like, we honestly don't know where we would be without that. And so I absolutely agree that it is a tool that God uses to help us heal, and like you said, to just do his best work in our lives. And so I love that. And I was thinking about too, verse came to mind as you were talking in 2 Corinthians 10:5. It talks about how we are to kind of come against arguments that set themselves up against God, and how we have to take captive every thought and surrender them to him.
Yes.
And so I feel like even that is a verse that oftentimes Christians use kind of in support of going, oh, I'm just going to pray, and God's going to take it away. I'm, taking captive these thoughts. And so oh, I'm anxious, I'm taking it captive and just giving it to God. And so while there's good intentions behind that, I think that doesn't always work or doesn't always help us, because I heard someone say about that verse once, if you're taking someone captive, like if you're taking a captive, you first have to identify who that person is, right? I mean, you're not just going to grab people out of nowhere and be like, I'm taking them captive and okay. No, you have to identify that person, take them captive, and then usually there's a process. You question them, there's some kind of punishment, something like that. So even that I've always loved, and I remember, just getting my degree in counseling and learning about cognitive behavioral therapy. And I remember just like having this revelation of like the Bible figured this out a long time ago.
As it does most things. Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so I love that. I think there's so many things that, especially like in the field of psychology and counseling, that lines up so much, with what the Bible says. But, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the, theories and techniques that we use most, I think in counseling in a lot of ways. And there, there's a lot of other great theories and things like that. But that one in particular, I think, goes along with what we're talking about, because it has a lot to do with how we process emotions. And so basically in cognitive behavioral therapy, what we do a lot of times is we encourage clients to pay attention to the things that they're thinking and feeling in the moment, right? And we encourage them to even record those things so that we can remember them later, talk about them. And so usually a feeling is connected to a thought, which is connected to a deeper belief that we hold, right? And so in order to, and really that it's thinking about your emotion is really a symptom of something that's going on deeper, right? And so that's why it's so important to process that, is because it usually is stemming from a deeper belief that we hold. And so if we don't then look at that belief in the face and, go, okay, is this true? Is this right? Do I need to change that? Then that broken process is always going to be there, and difficult emotions and behaviors and, things are always going to come from that. And so I think that verse speaks so much to that too. By taking that captive, we're able to really go through that process of going, okay, I feel this thing in this moment. This thing I feel is depression. I feel hopelessness. I feel despair. What thoughts am I thinking connected to that? Is it, man, I can't ever succeed at anything. I'm such a failure. I'm never going to get this right. And so that connects to deeper beliefs that we have about ourselves. Like, do we see ourselves as failures? Do we have, misbeliefs and wrong ideas about God that we believe that are leading to, even difficulties in our relationship with him? Or what do we believe about relationships? And then how does that translate into how that comes out in the moment of interactions with other people? So I think that, I love that verse and what it means. And I think that as Christians, that's a process that is so important for us to go through, to really take that thought captive, name it, identify it, figure out what it's connected to, because the Bible also talks about that as we think in our minds, so we are. Right. And so that is totally what we're talking about. So we have to, just really practice this, where we are paying attention to the things that we're thinking, and then figuring out what that's connected to, and then kind of challenging that thing at the core. And so I love, I think that as Christians too, we actually have a leg up with this kind of thing, because, from a therapist perspective, okay, so if I'm helping someone that is a non-believer with some of those things, and we're working on self-affirmations, those things are so great and so powerful, and, they can have great implications. But as a Christian, we have truth, we have scripture, we have, just absolute truth that we can apply to some of the things that we're feeling. And so I think this is where we do have a leg up of going, well, God has told me these things in his word, and this is what his word says about who I am, and this is what his promises are. And so when we've identified those emotions, we've identified those thoughts, we've identified the deeper things that we believe, then we can take that thing and go, well, this is what the word says about it. This is what God has already told me. And that it's just amazing, how effective that is in just demolishing those things that kind of get us in the hangups that we do. It's just kind of amazing how that works.
You said that so beautifully. Just, your whole, the whole explanation that you gave for, cognitive behavioral, and then, beliefs, and how thoughts can, really analyzing thoughts to see how they come from beliefs, and then distorted, maybe core beliefs that we've developed when we were younger. And it's so important to look at those things, because if and I always say we have to challenge our thoughts with truth, especially if it's an irrational thought or something like that. We have to look at it with truth and logic. And so if I'm brought up, in a home, when growing up, if I'm brought up in a home where the message that I receive is that I'm unworthy and I'm never going to be good enough and I'm not loved, then I'm going to carry that belief with me, possibly into adolescence and then on into adulthood, and it'll kind of cast this shadow over me into my adulthood. But, if I'm able to stop and then look at, this is how I'm feeling in this moment, I really need to see what it connects to. And if it connects to that core belief that I had, of unworthiness and inadequacy, that I can challenge that with truth. And the truth is, no, I am worthy. I'm a daughter of the King. I'm a son of the King, and I mean, he's chosen me. I'm redeemed. I'm forgiven, and I'm redeemed, and I have abundant life in Him. And it's so important that we're able to, that we allow ourselves, first of all, to look at, to feel the painful emotion, to feel that, and then look it back and say, well, what does this connect to? Because then you and I know that our thoughts and our feelings then connect to our actions and our behaviors. So right. if I'm not aware of what my thoughts are, and if I'm not taking them captive and then doing the same thing with my emotions, that's going to affect what behaviors I engage in. And it's going to make a difference between if I decide I want to engage in a healthy behavior or a poor behavior, or if I want to say hurtful things to people, or if good relationships are important to me. It's just kind of overreaching the importance of our thoughts and our belief systems, and then how our emotions connect to them.
Yes. I love that. That's so awesome. And I think that,
yes, I'm sorry, you have to edit this.
No, go for it. we get the role to get so passionate about these things, right?
Which is great.
Yes.
And it disconnects back to what you said too. I mean, it's so easy for the enemy to get into our heads and to use our thoughts and our emotions against us. Jesus knew that, and that's why that verse and different pieces of the New Testament speaks to that. We have to take our thoughts captive, because our enemy, he knows us. He knows our hang-ups. He knows our challenges. He knows where we struggle, and he's going to use that against us. So I don't want I don't want the enemy knowing more about me than I know about me. Right. Why would I want that? So I'm going to process through those emotions. I'm going to see how they're connected to my beliefs and my belief systems, and if it's connected to any distorted thought. And then I'm going to really challenge it with truth. And I'm going to bust it wide open so that he can't use that against me.
Yep. I love that. That's so good. And honestly, it is one of the things I get most passionate about as a counselor, and those moments with clients where they see where it all connects,
yes.
that's the stuff you're like, yes, because that's going to be the stuff that changes the rest of their lives, you know? And so even just shining the light on how it all connects to each other and being able to look at those deep core beliefs, because I think the other thing that we don't always realize is they're not very conscious, they really live in our subconscious. Mm-hmm. So the part of us that we're not really, actively aware of in each moment, but they're influencing and shaping everything that we're thinking and feeling, mm-hmm. and our behaviors and all of those things. So if we can bring those things to the conscious part of us, then that gives us the ability to control them, to challenge them, to change them, and to look at them and go, oh man, like I didn't realize I believed that, but I don't want to believe that. And I don't have to believe that. And this is the truth that I want to believe. And so then beginning that process of once we've identified those things, then when that same anxiety pops its head up, or the depression, we've already done the work of connecting those pieces. And so then we go, no, like I know the name of this, and I know the truth now. And so then be able to apply that in the moment is really how we go about changing those things, and work through that depression, and work through that anxiety, or whatever it is that we're dealing with. And so that is the thing that those moments in therapy that I think just get me so excited, because it's people really seeing truth for the first time, and getting the power back, the control back of their health, their mental health, and their spiritual lives, and their relationships. And the implications for that are just endless, like it's just pretty fantastic.
Those are the moments where I have to say, thank you, God, for allowing me to be a part of this. Like, for allowing me to witness this, to be a part of it. Thank you for using me. This is such a privilege. And those moments are wonderful to behold.
Yes. And I think God feels the same way. I think those are the same moments. He's doing a happy dance, and he's like,
absolutely.
Yes, like, now we can get things done for my kingdom, like now
finally.
we can work on it. So I love that. And that's honestly why I'm super passionate just about, even talking to people of faith about this, and, and bringing this conversation into the church even more. Because I think it's where we really experience, like you mentioned earlier, the life that God designed for us to have, true abundant life with joy and whole living. And, I think it's then when we can get to a place where we're not bogged down by all these lies and these, these things we feel about ourselves. And I think it's where God can truly know us. We can be known by him, and we can do amazing things for him, and he can do amazing things through us.
Yes.
So I love that.
And I think too, just to kind of, go when we're speaking about the church, and so many people who are non-believers have the idea that, those Jesus people or those Christians, they don't struggle the way that I struggle, or they don't have these issues, when really, we do. Jesus said this, you're going to have trouble in this world, and we certainly do. And so when we are authentic, and when we reach out, and when we're honest, and when we allow ourselves to do the processing, and then to ask people to come alongside of us, and non-believers see that, they kind of want to know more about that. We look real to them. Christians in the church they just look real, and they look honest. And who doesn't want to be a part of that? And especially when they see that they're still being accepted despite the difficulties they might be having, or the depression, or the anxiety, or the addiction, or whatever it might be. They still love that person, even though they've got that going on. Even though they say they follow Jesus, they still take care of that person. I mean, that is so much more powerful than any words that we could use, or to show just the love and care that we have for one another as Christians and brothers and sisters in Christ, and allowing non-believers to see us behaving in that way towards one another. That's important. And I don't know that the church always gets it right. Yeah.
Yep. And like you said too, even the friendly fire aspect of that as well. I just feel like I just don't want to see, more pastors and people like, in the church struggling with these things and not talking about it, and not getting the help that they need. And then it's too late, or they just are living in shame, or living in fear, or, it's just not how God intended us to live at all. And so, I really hope that by talking about these things even more, that we can be the salt and light that we are called to be, to the rest of the world, but, also experience life abundantly, and the joy that is promised to us as believers too, and really step to both of those things. So I love that. And I think we partly answered, the last question that I had for you today about coping. So we kind of already talked a lot about, okay, once you identify these things, you process through them, take them captive, look at what it's connected to. That kind of is coping, in and of itself, so I think that's a huge part of it, is talking to someone that you trust, having a good support system, talking to a pastor, praying to God, worshiping, being able to sit in that moment, in that feeling and go, okay, I know I have the tendency to feel this, but I also know some things that have helped me and worked for me. I know there's been times in my own life where I just had a song that really spoke to me, in that season. And so anytime I, I started struggling with just fear or uncertainty or, doubting God or, any of those things, I would go to that song and just sit in my room and listen to it, and just, I think that's a great coping skill that we can have. Music is such a powerful resource. My prayer journal, like I mentioned before, has been a huge thing for me. Is there anything else, Amy, that you would say on positive, healthy coping skills?
I'm definitely a big fan of physical movement.
Yes.
I said earlier when we started talking that emotions have energy to them. And they do, and that energy has to go somewhere. And so a lot of times, and I choose to use the phrase physical movement instead of exercise. It's a bit less off-putting than exercise.
That is good. I totally received that better than if you said exercise.
Don't you know? So it sounds much better than exercise. Exercise sounds so judgmental.
Yes. Or, it's true though. Physical movement can mean so many things, whereas exercise up a lot of things that are probably connected for us, and we think about weights and the gym, and there's a lot that goes into that. So I like that. I like physical movement.
That's why I changed it.
So, I love it. I'm gonna use that too.
So when I say physical movement, you're right. I'm talking about go for a walk around your block, go garden, go pull some weeds out of your garden, go mow the grass, go. Personally, I do like to lift weights. I love it. And I feel like it's part of me honoring God with my body too, because I'm getting rid of some of that energy, but I'm also taking care of his temple. So, anytime when I say physical movement, I'm talking about anything that gets you up, that gets you moving. That's a great way to deal with just emotions and the energy that comes from them. And then, you mentioned music, which is a great one. And then there's so many really good podcasts out there. So many people, Christian leaders and, motivational speakers, Christian motivational speakers have such good, easy to access information out there. And so if there are things that I'm struggling with, or if I'm conflicted about things, I kind of know which ones I want to go to, because even if it's not speaking to my particular issue or the particular emotions that I'm trying to work through, there's usually some kind of good nuggets I'm going to get from it. There's something that's going to be dropped that I'm going to hear and be able to pick up and use. And so kind of, we have talked a lot about coping today while we were talking about the emotional processing and all of that. And, and then the other ideas that we have, but just kind of surrounding yourself with things that are spirit-filled and positive, and but challenging too, because we want to be challenged. If we're thinking distorted thoughts, if we're not taking them captive in the way that we need to, we want to make sure that we've got things and people in our life who can challenge us on that and who aren't afraid to do it. So podcasts and music and lots of online resources and friends, family that you trust, physical movement, great ways to cope.
Yep. I love that. And the great thing about this quarantine season is that churches have really upped their game on, their online resources.
They have.
I know even our church in particularly, we have live prayer that we do. We have devotionals. We have Wednesday worship. We just have so many, things, and there's so many resources out there that churches are just offering right now. And I think that has been a really cool thing that has come from this season. So there's really no excuse to not be connected to positive, life-giving content. And so I love that. I think that's all great. And even, the only other thought I had was self-care. We talk a lot about that too in, our society today. And I think sometimes it gets a bad rep and,
it does.
there's probably that we could probably do a whole talk just on that aspect, but
we could.
you know, just the idea of coping is that it's supposed to help you feel better, you know, and I think sometimes too we fight against we shouldn't feel better, you know, but no, like that's what coping skills are for. And so it's just doing that in a way that actually helps us feel better, not just pacifies us in the moment, you know. Not just eating a plate of brownies, because that does help you feel better, you know, in the moment.
Exactly.
But doing things that are actually helpful to you, but do help you feel better. You know, so I think that's a good aspect where true self-care can come into play. So even things as simple as a bubble bath, or, you know, something like that, where you're just going, you know, I need some space. I need to, you know, I've just been really stressed out today, and just being honest with yourself about what you need and being okay with giving that to yourself, as long as it is something, you know, that is truly helpful to you and lines up with the progress that you're trying to make in, you know, all the other things that we talked about. So I think that's a good thing.
I always say that good coping skills, you know, they're healthy and they're good if they also have long-term benefit as well. So that plate of brownies, short term, it's going to feel really good, but an hour from now, I'm going to regret it and feel shame and guilt for eating that plate of brownies. You know, I always say to people too, you know, drugs and alcohol are coping skills. They're really poor ones. They're not healthy at all, and they work in the moment, but they don't have any good long-term benefit. So, you know, what's going to help me now, and like you said, that's going to help me build on what I'm already working towards, and it's going to have a good return in the long run too.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Amy, thank you so much just for talking with me today. I think that we covered a lot of good ground, and hopefully just covered some topics that are going to be encouraging to people during this time and helpful. And I think you just have such a great way of just explaining things that makes sense, and is so encouraging at the same time. So I just appreciate your voice in this, and in my life, you know, I know you have done that for me. So I'm excited for other people to get to hear that and listen to it. So thanks for being on today.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And I miss you.
I know, you too. You too. But I'm glad we got to do this and still stay connected. So
me too.
That's super awesome. Well, and thank you everyone for joining us. And next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about how to talk to your kids about their emotions and different things that we can be paying attention to about how they express emotions, how to help them cope with their emotions. So I'm really excited to dive into that a little bit. So definitely make sure you join us next time. But thanks for today, and happy coping, right? Bye, everyone. Thanks.